In this demonstration, I want to show you how to implement Adobe Online Interactive Forms with Dynpro. When you implement online scenarios with Dynpro, the installed software components have to match exactly. Compared with pure print scenarios, you have to consider much more details on the whole installation and handling of the components, which is the SAP GUI, the Lifecycle Designer from Adobe, the Adobe Reader, the SAP NetWeaver system with the installed Adobe Document Services. All this has to match. In addition, you need reader-write credentials, and depending on the SAP NetWeaver release, you might even have to introduce special scripting code inside the Lifecycle Designer. In SAP, you have 3 different scenarios for the Adobe Interactive Forms. There's first the Online Interactive Form scenario. Online means an SAP system access is needed all the time while you're working on the application, and it's fully integrated into Dynpro for Java or ABAP. You have context-sensitive value help available, and you can implement online checks. Your browser needs an Adobe Reader plugin. The next scenario is the Offline Interactive Form scenario. You work offline in the form here, which means no SAP system access is needed. So you either download the form, or you get it sent by email. You have a static value help here, and static checking and simple arithmetic calculations are possible. The offline interactive form is a self-contained PDF, which means it has XML data plus layout in one. And you have the form printing scenario. That's the classic form processing, and it's not interactive. So it's designed basically for mass printing and archiving. So interactive PDF use is possible online or offline on the Java or ABAP platform. And the non-interactive scenario is the backend printing, which is available in ABAP. At the time, you have 6 different ways how the interactive form solution is integrated into the SAP. That's the guided procedures for offline form-based workflow processes, the internet service requests for online forms-based workflow processes, Dynpro for Java for application development with standard UI technology, Dynpro for ABAP for interactive application development in ABAP, then the integration into the ABAP Workbench for high volume printing with transaction SFP, and enterprise reporting for printing dynamic BI tables. So what are the key best practices to use interactive form solutions in SAP? If you want to integrate regulatory or industry group forms to SAP without losing any formatting, if you want to see what you print, if you want to preserve the original design and data in one document for archive forms, which is not possible with HTML, if you want to lock down the state of a form with a digital signature, if you want to support barcodes. With interactive forms, you can do document certification and signing on the server, so you can ensure that the form recipient can trust the identity of the form creator. You can validate certified documents on the server to ensure that the form template of incoming forms was not modified. You can validate the digital signatures on the server. And you can set document permissions. For example, that it's not allowed to print a document. What I want to show you is the integration of the Adobe Forms into Dynpro. So I'm not talking about the pros and cons compared with the SAP Smart Forms or sub GUI technology, or why should we use Adobe Forms on top of another UI technology. Instead, I want to show you the technical aspects, how to integrate an interactive Adobe form into Dynpro. Our scenario is like this application. You see there's a Dynpro application where the user can put in some data and then hits the button the data is transferred to an interactive form, which is loaded into the Adobe Reader plugin. And now the user can change the data and navigate back to the Web Dynpro. So the context is already changed, as you can see here. And so the changed data can now be saved in the database or whatsoever. I have prepared a Web Dynpro component, ZWD IAF demo. IAF stands for Interactive Forms. In this component, there's nothing implemented yet in the component controller or in the view. The input view has nothing on the layout. It's quite empty. What we want to achieve is that on the input view, the user types in or selects with F4 a customer ID. Then the customer is loaded into the system, sent to an interactive form, so allowing the user to change the customer data and save it on the spot, then close the interactive form and navigate back to the Web Dynpro. So we will first implement the business logic here. That means we want to update customer information. I decided to implement the business functionality as a service call. I want to use the update customer method of my flight model class. And the service call will also create me the necessary execute method and the context. So I'm creating the service call on my component. Decide to use an existing controller. I want to call a class method, my flight model class, and here the method update customer. I make sure that all the data I need is created in the context. The importing structure customer I also need as a context node. Execute update customer will be the method created. And here's my context plus my new execute method is created here, which at the end eventually calls the update customer. In the next step, I can create the necessary mapping in my view and then define the input form by using the Web Dynpro code wizard. And I'm not interested in binding all these values. I'm just interested in the ID as an input field. I want to create a button now that allows me to navigate to the interactive form later. The caption is edit customer. And we need an action for this button. To form. And we need to create an outbound plug here. Finally, I want to see what's the data in Web Dynpro, so I can compare the Web Dynpro customer data with the interactive form customer data. So that means I'm creating a new element here, which is a group, and in this group I will have another form, not only with customer number, but with all customer data. Whenever the user then hits enter on the input field, the form will be populated. We use the form wizard again, but this time on the entire customer except for the client field, and we make sure that all are bound. Now we don't want the input fields in the customer data group to be available for input. They should be read-only. In newer versions of NetWeaver, you could have already chosen a text view, but here in this older version, I only could select input fields. So we have to go now through all the fields here and make them read-only. Let's do this quick. And the last one. In the next step, we have to define the action on the input field. That's read customer. Then we implement this action. The action should, based on the customer ID, read the entire customer information. We have to read the customer ID. And with this variable lvid, we are able to call the flight model class read customer method and then write this back to the context. The returning structure rs as custom is the variable that we need to write to the context. So we use the Dynpro code wizard again. And we already have access to the element. So that's what's remaining. Now we want to do a quick test on the first part of the application. We create the application here and run it. Now we can use the for input help on our customer number field. You see it opens an older version of the input help because my NetWeaver is an older one. We start the search, pick up the first customer, and then we hit enter on this input field, and then we have all information ready. Remember that this is displayed here in read-only mode, so we have a proof of concept. Once the data gets changed on the interactive view and we navigate back, that we see that even the Dynpro knows about this change. What we have to implement now is the action on the edit customer button, because this button has to navigate us to the form view. Creating our second view, call it simply form. And in the second view, we first provide the data through context mapping. This is IS customer, what we want to display here. And I will create a second attribute here in the context of the form views. If you want to store the PDF in the SAP system, you have to provide a variable of type xstring that can contain the whole PDF in one object. So you can then later archive it or download it, upload it to other places. For our purpose here, it's not really mandatory. I just want to show you this attribute. So then we can provide the layout. On the root UI element container, we insert the interactive form element. And you see that the interactive form element has also property PDF source, which we can already bind. It's only bindable to string types. And we will adapt the height and the width. The width should be 100% of the embedding view. And then we have here two properties, data source and template source. These are the most important properties of an interactive form. The data source property needs a binding to the node we want to display. And the template source property needs a binding to the interactive form itself. So what we have here, this interactive form element, is just an embedding container for the form object itself. We should not forget to enable the navigation between the two forms. So we need an inbound plug here on the second form. Call it from input. And this plug needs to be connected to the outbound plug of the input form. And this is something we will do in the window. We will embed our second view. And then make sure that we connect both. With a navigation link. We can do a test already. Works. We can navigate back to our form view, and in the form view we will take care of the most important property, that's template source. So we're going to create our template source now, call it ZWD customer form. Doesn't exist yet. Hit it, and then we have to decide which interface is going to be used. Adobe forms are based on interfaces, so we have a decoupling here of the layout and the data structure the layout is working with. So an interface, a data structure, can be reused by multiple forms. That makes life easier once you have created data supplying programs and you want to work on forms. So these data supply programs can always work on the same interface and so support multiple layouts. Customer IF, and I will create it based on my existing context with this node. So now we see something new. This editor here is the Adobe Designer. And what we also see is that we have a new object here created in the formed object. This is the new form, and also a new interface is created for the form. You can also edit the form separately without going through the Dynpro component by using transaction SFP. So first we have to look at the properties of the form. It's important that the property layout type is set correctly. Once you come into the form through a Dynpro, then the system doesn't give you the proper layout type. Not in this release here of NetWeaver and not in the latest releases. The layout type we use is ZCI layout. Only this layout will work for Dynpro and makes you independent of your browser. If you use this layout type, it's deprecated now. That means you have to use ActiveX framework and you're pretty much bound to the Internet Explorer. It's also important that you set the layout before you do anything else. Now you see when I'm setting the layout, I get the message here, check the Dynpro script of the layout. Which indicates already that this layout type is bound to Dynpro. This Dynpro script is something that I have to add to the form myself. the system is not doing this for me. And therefore, I will go later to Utilities, insert the Dynpro script once I'm in the layout. When I've added the Dynpro script, then a new variable here is available. Container Foundation JS. JS stands for JavaScript. But now let me talk about the editor itself. This is the Adobe Designer plugin in the sub GUI, and you see the editing area is very small. You have this separate button where another window will open with the designer in the foreground. Now we have a much better overview. Now when we look at the XML source, if in your editor XML source is not available, then you simply go to View, XML source. In the XML source, you hit on this Container Foundation JS and you see the script that was entered here. And these scripts are versioned. You see here the version number. The version depends only on the Adobe Designer that you're using. So you saw already when I'm selecting something here in the hierarchy view, like the Container Foundation JS variable, then the XML source is highlighting the appropriate row. So it's time for the design. And the design can be done easily by going to the Data View tab on the left-hand side and drag and drop the entire data structure here. Now you can move this around. We want to also embed a small image here, a static image. And we have just to make sure that all fields have a proper type. When you look here at this customer type, it is a checkbox. And in my Dynpro, it's not a checkbox. The problem here, it's a character 1 field, customer type, whether it's a private customer or a business customer. So this attribute private or business cannot be shown just with a checkbox. If I don't want to have activation problems, I have to make this also a text field here, like the others. To the left-hand side. So I've now made the customer type in line with the other attributes. In order to finalize our form, we have to add the button. The button will allow us to navigate back from the form to the Dynpro. The button will not trigger data transfer to the context. The data in the context is already changed once the user changes values in the form. So here in our object library, we navigate down to the Dynpro native fields and then use a submit button and drag and drop this submit button. We have to use this Dynpro native submit button because it has a special property. Let's go here to the hierarchy and choose the XML source. And when we hit the submit button, we see that it's defined as a field. And the most important property of the submit button is the event activity, what should happen when the user clicks. And there is the necessary scripting in the XML source. The layout is finished. And we can activate our form. Go back to our form view because we haven't specified yet what should happen when the user submits the form. Our idea is when the user hits the button, he navigates back to the Dynpro view. That means here in the form view, we have the onSubmit event. And this submit event will basically trigger an outbound plug to the input view. Outbound plug action inbound plug on the input view. That all doesn't exist, and that's what we want to create now. We start first creating the action to input view, and then create an outbound plug also to input view. We can call this outbound plug in the action. We use the Dynpro code wizard and start navigation here. Now, navigation isn't the only thing that we want to do in this action. Whenever we navigate back from the interactive form to the input view, we want to also update the user. The purpose of the interactive view was to enable users to update customer data. For the update functionality, we have implemented an execute update customer method already in our component controller. So let's check out this method. Execute update customer, and this is what we have to call now from our form. So it doesn't really matter here whether we do it before we fire the plug or after we fire the plug. Firing a plug is stored in a so-called navigation queue, and the queue isn't executed immediately. So if the system is coming across an error, it won't navigate at all. So here we use the Dynpro code wizard to call our component controllers execute update customer method. And the form view is finished, and now we go back to the input view and create an inbound plug here from form view. The input view is also finished, and now we have to link both plugs, outbound plug and inbound plug, in the window. As we did here, created an outbound navigation from the input view to the form view, outbound plug of input view to inbound plug of form view. Now we want to do the same thing here. We have to drag the form view's outbound plug onto the input view's inbound plug. That creates a navigation link, and we activate the window, and then we're ready to test our application. We use the search herb to select our first customer here. Hit enter on the input field. Our plan is to change the business private customer indicator here. We hit edit customer. We navigate now into the interactive form, and the customer type is available for change. Business or private are the two options, and now I can use the submit button to navigate back to the Dynpro and double check. Now it's business. The problem now with this application is on the interactive form, the user does not know which are the allowed values. So what we need is a kind of value help. And this is the next thing that we're going to implement. So therefore we navigate into our interactive form again. Open the layout editor. And here the field cust type needs a value help. It depends now on your Adobe Designer version. In my older version, I have to use the ISR native controls, and here it's the value help field. Now this comes along with a text field. The text field I do not need, so I can delete this, move my value help button up to the customer field. And then I have to have a look into the script that's created for this button. And here in the script, you see there's a variable field name, and the field name reads field name to be replaced, clearly indicating that this has to be cust type, because my field I want to apply the value have to is cust type, and don't forget this is all uppercase. Now we can save this changed form, and do not forget to activate and refresh our application. Now there's the new button. Let's try the button. The input field comes up. Right now we have a B, make it a P. Submit. And there's the P. Now we want to make sure that it was also writing to the database. So we call the application again for the same customer. And it's a P now. Now the nice thing with this Adobe Form integration into Dynpro is that from an end user point of view, the user experience is much more to what the end users are normally used if they don't know Dynpro. You see here the Adobe Reader plugin offers me a save option. It offers me print option, and it allows me also to attach this Adobe Form to an email. So I've saved this already. If we open now the Adobe Reader, we can open the form and edit the form even offline. So far for the introduction into interactive forms for Dynpro. Of course, I recommend, if you're interested in this subject, to study the SAP BC480 course, or wait for one of my next tutorials where I will also cover the subject.